Have a roll call by our city clerk, Kathy Valdez.
The record shall reflect that all members are present.
Deputy Mayor Green is going to lead the Pledge of Allegiance. Will you all rise, please?
Please place your right hand over your heart. Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In accordance with the Brown Act, I'd like to announce that as a result of convening simultaneous meetings, the members of the Buenos Sanitation District will receive compensation of $147.75 for the district meeting pursuant to Buenos Sanitation District Ordinance 2006-1. I'd like to remind everyone that the Vista Municipal Code requires members of the public to observe order and decorum at the meeting and to conduct themselves in a courteous manner. The ordinance was adopted to allow for public input and to facilitate city business without disruption of the meeting. Applause is appropriate for the items listed under the presentation portion of the agenda only. To speak on an item on the agenda, please fill out a speaker slip with a number of the item you want to speak on. Give it to the city clerk, secretary, staff. Speaker slips are available just outside the council chambers, and speakers will have 3 minutes to address the city council tonight. With that, we have approval of the agenda by our city manager, Patrick Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. There is one change to the agenda this evening, and that is the removal of item P1 under presentation. This is a presentation that was going to be provided by Caltrans on their Adopt a Highway program, and this will be brought back at the December meeting.
Okay, the next thing is our closed session. We had a closed session. Our city attorney, Daryl Piper, will bring us back out of our closed session.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. The City Council did meet in closed session to discuss item CS2 on today's closed session. CS1 was removed from the agenda. With reference to CS2, the City Council voted unanimously to approve the filing of litigation against United Kronos Group on due to a breach of contract by that group involving them and the city. Thank you.
Okay, and then again, our presentation was rescheduled for December. And that brings us to our consent calendar. The recommendations on the following consent calendar will be enacted in one motion unless an item is removed from the calendar. Any member of the public may remove an item by submitting a request to speak card to the clerk secretary. Items removed from the consent calendar will be considered immediately following adoption of the calendar, and we have 7 consent items this evening. And so with that, I have anything, nothing from the public. And so I have Councilmember Green, Deputy Mayor Green.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that we approve the consent calendar as presented.
Councilmember Franklin.
I second.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, please cast your votes. That motion passes unanimously. And that brings us to our discussion item. We have one discussion item this evening, and that is a strategic plan to address homelessness, the shelter, and the permanent housing discussion is this part. We had our discussion on homeless a couple weeks ago, and so this will be the shelter and permanent housing part of that discussion. So our Assistant City Manager, Amanda Lee, is going to introduce the item.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. On September 28th, the City Council received an update of the strategic plan to address homelessness, and during the discussion, City Council directed staff to discuss emergency shelters and permanent housing. Staff has been gathering data, including how shelters are funded and constructed in other communities, how best to collaborate with various organizations and regions, and what funding resources are available. Based on the information received, staff has prepared a report for a comprehensive discussion on shelters and permanent housing, including an overview of the city's homeless population, areas zoned for a shelter, funding options, and staff recommendations. Now I would like to introduce Sylvia Solis-Daniels, our Housing Program Manager, who will be presenting the information for tonight's discussion.
Good evening, Mayor and members of Council. The first slide before you includes local homeless population profile. Staff has gathered data to provide a clearer depiction of the individuals experiencing homelessness in the city of Vista. There are limitations on the data sources and the ability to enumerate everyone experiencing homelessness, but this slide provides data from the contract social worker from Exodus Recovery. It includes individuals experiencing homelessness in the city during the period of October 2020 through September 2021. The slide does not include individuals uncontacted or individuals contacted by a different social service provider. A total of 427 individuals were identified as unsheltered in Vista. A majority of those individuals were male and fewer were female. The age ranges primarily fall between the 25 to 59-year-old group, with 209 individuals, or 49% of the population. In the 20-24-year-old category, there were 33 individuals, or 8% of the population, and only 39, or 9% of the population in the 60 and older category. The total number of individuals who identify as veterans make up only 29%, or 7% of the 29 or 7% of the population. A majority of the population, 54%, identify as non-military, and 40% are unknown military status. The Regional Task Force on Homelessness has an online data dashboard tool providing a snapshot of individuals experiencing homelessness. This utilizes data entered into the Homeless Management Information System. This slide represents individuals contacted through those service providers located in the city who utilize HMIS. This doesn't include individuals who either didn't access services or access services at agencies that do not participate in HMIS. The HMIS system also removes individuals after 90 days of inactivity. This limits the full scope of the population, but this data also includes a family shelter provider, which represents a high volume of female head of households who are sheltered in Vista, as well as one street outreach provider. The data set represents the 2020 calendar year and identified 320 individuals experiencing homelessness in Vista, including 165 households. A majority are female, and males make up only 35% of the population. The ages represented in the data are also significantly skewed, with a high volume of 0 to 17-year-olds due to the family service provider included in the data. This does not fully reflect the unsheltered population of Vista, and it's more representative of the sheltered population of Vista. The city contracts with the Alliance for Regional Solutions, ARS, which is a network of shelters and nonprofit organizations, to prioritize up to 10 shelter beds per night for people experiencing homelessness in Vista. The city social worker coordinates with the ARS shelters to place individuals at local shelters, including Haven House in Escondido and La Posada in Carlsbad. Over the last 12 months, a total of 44 individuals from Vista have been placed at these shelters. A majority are male, 82% of the population, with a smaller group of females representing 18% of the population. The majority fall in the 40 to 59-year-old age group, and very few identify as veterans, and a majority identify as non-veteran. This slide includes or identifies the most commonly reported reasons clients decline shelter: the congregate dorm-like living environment, clients have too many pets or do not have an emotional support animal letter, clients are not able to cohabitate in the same bed as their partner, or a previous negative experience at a shelter. The combined local and regional data indicate that most of Vista's unsheltered population is primarily male and fall between the ages of 25 to 59 and are not utilizing existing shelter options. When considering the creation of a shelter and permanent housing, the primary service population should be considered, as well as the reasons shelter resources are declined by individuals experiencing homelessness. There are various types of housing that are aimed at assisting people who are or at risk of becoming homeless. The types of housing include emergency shelters, which are facilities that provide temporary shelter for people experiencing homelessness. The facilities do not require occupants to sign leases or occupancy agreements. Transitional housing provides up to 24 months of temporary residence with wraparound services to help a person become housing ready. Permanent supportive housing offers permanent affordable housing with voluntary and flexible support and services to help people manage serious chronic issues such as mental health issues and substance use disorders. Affordable housing is housing for which an occupant is paying no more than 30% of their gross income. In addition, the occupant's income must fall below the area median income. This slide identifies zones which allow new shelters in the city of Vista. The city's development code permits the establishment of new emergency shelters by right in the C2, C3, and M1 zones under specified conditions. Additionally, the C1 zone allows for one emergency shelter within the entire zone with a special use permit, not to exceed 50 beds. And the RM multi-residential zone allows for one emergency shelter within the entire zone with a special use permit, not to exceed 60 beds, with additional requirements, including the shelters located on a lot or commonly owned adjacent lots with an area of at least 3 acres. And the shelter will operate as an integral part of the larger existing facility, which includes at least 20 transitional housing units and 20 permanent housing units, with a total number of those units at least equaling the number of beds in the shelter. The specifics included in the C1 zone were established for the Operation Hope shelter that currently operates off East Vista Way, and the specifics for the RM zone were established to support a proposed shelter development in 2017, which is no longer in progress. Any locations outside of these zones would likely require going through the zoning amendment process. This process includes public hearings and a review by the Planning Commission and City Council. This could add approximately 6 months to the project. This is noted for future reference when evaluating readiness and timeliness for funding options. Any residential zone, including multifamily, single-family, and mixed-use properties, are zoned for affordable and permanent supportive housing. Transitional housing is not permitted in the MU zone. The annual operating costs for shelter vary depending on the level of care provided. This slide outlines 2 shelter service models utilizing data from the City of San Diego, including current shelters and a future harm reduction shelter. The standard model is most common in current shelter models and has limited on-site services. The average cost per bed night is $67 for a standard shelter model. The full service model example noted on this slide utilizes the City of San Diego's newly approved harm reduction interim shelter model. This provides specialized stabilization and supportive services for individuals experiencing homelessness with co-occurring substance and mental health conditions. This model offers all of the standard services plus behavioral and health services, substance abuse treatment, residential service, 24/7 on-site security, and clinical support. The average cost of bed per night is $125 per night. The operating cost for permanent housing would be included in the initial development plan, which would also include a combination of funding sources, subsidies, and rental vouchers. A financial contribution by the city, either in the form of land or money, is used by a developer to secure other highly competitive funding sources, such as tax credits. There are a variety of funding options available for the development of a shelter and affordable housing, but there are very limited resources for ongoing operational support for a shelter. This slide identifies funds that are currently available as either allocated funds or competitive funding applications. The city does not have the resources available to operate a shelter or develop permanent affordable housing on its own. If the council wishes to pursue the creation of new shelter and/or permanent housing, then it's necessary that the projects be developed through a regional approach and/or with a developer. Staff has connected with other regional municipalities and service providers to gather information and identify best practices. In speaking with other cities, staff has identified an interest in regional collaboration, which would vary for every city, but could include a financial contribution or other resources in support of a new shelter for the North County region. However, at this time, staff has not received any financial commitments. Next slide, please. Key considerations. The city has proactively addressed homelessness through various contracts and collaborations for over 1 year, and it's just begun to understand the full needs of the unsheltered population in Vista. We now have 1 year of data and experience to craft the next steps in the strategic plan. Shelter and housing should be evaluated in collaboration with our neighboring communities, as any new shelter would serve as a regional resource. 4 key considerations to review include the alignment with regional resources. There are other neighboring and North County cities in the process of discussing a regional shelter resources. As we proceed with identifying priorities for a shelter and/or permanent affordable housing options, the city may consider local partnerships as well as new or in-progress projects. The Fair Housing Act should also be considered. It requires that housing providers such as shelter providers and landlords prohibit discrimination against tenants. This includes limiting access to housing based on current residents, or, for example, providing shelters for Vista residents only. Any low-barrier shelter established would require access to anyone in the coordinated entry system, matching placement requirements. This could be noted, or should be noted, for the shelter and housing discussion when reviewing need and available resources. All shelter and housing resources are pooled together as a region, and shelter and housing providers cannot limit who will be housed or sheltered, provided that the client meets the threshold requirements. Community engagement would also be determined once staff receives council direction on next steps for shelter or affordable housing. A community engagement plan could be included in the next steps as directed by council and could include both virtual and in-person opportunities for the public to participate. The city will need to identify potential partners to proceed with either a shelter or permanent housing. A developer and service provider typically take the lead in the creation of either project and request capital finance support from the city, which then ideally attracts additional funding and partners to strengthen the viability of the project as other funds are infused into the development. Since the last update of the strategic plan, an affordable developer has approached the city with a proposed permanent supportive affordable housing project. The developer has acquired a site and is aligning financial resources to create a competitive project to compete for tax credits. County Innovative Housing Trust Funds, No Place Like Home funds, and project-based vouchers. The project is still in the pre-development phase, and staff will continue to monitor the development. Staff recommends proceeding with a council discussion to identify priorities for permanent housing and shelter options to obtain directions to proceed with one of the following options. A, draft a request for proposal for developers to propose a low-barrier shelter. B, draft a request for proposal for developers to propose a permanent affordable housing development. Or C, continue regional collaboration discussions. This concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions.
Okay, we have one speaker. Do you want to hear the speaker first? Okay. So that would be Holly Herring.
I'm Holly Herring. You all know. And I work in the homeless sector, and I have for years. And I feel I need to explain something when you're thinking about sheltering and housing options. If you compare, in an analogy, shelters with an emergency room waiting area and housing as the treatment rooms and beds with staff. And when your shelters are full, your waiting room is full, you can build a bigger waiting room, but it's not going to get anybody treated any faster. So if you build more shelters, which yes, are needed, you also need to build the housing to support the people to come out of the shelter into something. And the population largely in Vista that people don't want to see on the streets are people who are very difficult to shelter and house. The people that are visible, that bring in the complaints, this is a low barrier population. This is a population that's going to need permanent supportive housing. They're going to need a low barrier shelter and lots of supports. For whatever reasons, whether seeing them makes us sad, mad, it grosses us out, I think we can all agree that we don't want to see them outside. So if we make something, let's make it available to the bulk of the population that we're trying to serve that is currently left out of our city services now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that is our only speaker. So Deputy Mayor Green.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you so much, Sylvia and Amanda, for this presentation. I really appreciate it. I love data, so I like kind of digging into it. We have the advantage of having the agenda report with all the information, so when you spit out all those numbers, we can kind of follow along. I just wanted to clarify a couple things. Number one, you gave two numbers there for the city of Vista. One was 427, and that number was the city's contract social workers contacts since October 2020 to July of 2021. And those could be recurring individuals as well, right? Or are those all different cases, different individuals?
Those are unduplicated individuals.
Okay, so 427, so you've had contact with that, but you have our local homeless population as 281 as far as the profile goes. So does that mean that out of the 427 that she contacted over the past, whatever year or whatever, that now there's only 281 that we profiled? So your population profile, it had 33, 18 to 24, 125 to 39, 109, and then 39. I'm just wondering, if she dealt with 427 homeless within our city, does that mean that we made progress or got some of those? I mean, it's 156 people missing from the profile count was kind of my question.
What page or what profile are you referring to?
So on page 2 of 185 of the agenda report, you have you mentioned even in your presentation 427 individuals, and when I read it, it's 141 female, 282 male, 1 unknown, or
Right.
4 unknown. So that's where the 427 comes from, and basically it says that number was given to you from the Exodus social worker. So my question was, I felt like there were 2 different numbers given. One was
Correct.
427, one was 281. So I just want to know the difference between those 2.
So those are to represent 2 different data sources to kind of identify one of the challenges of identifying how many people are experiencing homelessness in Vista. The 281 number is the profile with the RTFH data,
Okay.
and that's representative of 2020. And the 427 is the most recent data
Okay.
from the social worker.
Okay, so the 281 was prior to the social workers. So social worker is the most recent data that we have.
Yeah,
Yes.
and they also are the ones who are going out in the field. So RTFH is collecting their data from a system called HMIS.
Okay.
So they're receiving their information from service providers. So they're actually not going out into the field and outreaching to
Yeah.
find these people. So if people aren't accessing resources, they're not being counted by the regional task force.
Okay.
So Exodus is contacting people who wouldn't be getting those resources.
Perfect.
They could also be double counted in that 200 number because
But the
they are getting.
427 is more of a accurate, in our
Exactly.
opinion, because we have boots on the ground that have kind of come up with that. And in my opinion, that number is higher than I've seen it since I've been on council in 2016. So there's, obviously some things we need to work at. And I think our strategic plan to address homelessness is definitely doing that. You mentioned 2 different types of care, standard and full service care. Are those cares, I would assume that maybe the permanent supportive housing would be more of the standard care, and then the emergency shelter would be more of a cost of the full service care because you may not need, or is it the other way around?
So those 2 models were specifically speaking to shelters only.
Just to shelters.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And in looking at the 4 different types of housing and shelters, I do feel like the things we're actually lacking here in the city of Vista are emergency homeless shelters, low to no barrier shelters, but also permanent supportive housing. I serve on different boards, as I know that we all do. And just recently, I provided a copy to my council. The Regional Task Force to Address Homelessness gave the report to me just yesterday at my litter abatement meeting. And it was kind of cool to talk with them and see what the city of San Diego, like you say, it's a regional solution and everybody's trying to work together. And I really feel like we're out of our silos and we're kind of sharing data across the board. And I'm hoping that we work with the regional. I know I spoke with Amanda and she's involved in this. But really what our goal is to, get our homeless population, sheltered and kind of back being productive members of society. And there's a lot of super smart smart people, you guys right there who are working on it, who are coming up with amazing ideas. There's always been some hesitation to shelters because of the the environment that it brings to surrounding areas. My goal for a shelter, I see that we have different zonings for it, is that they would stay out of residential areas. I don't mind them in the commercial areas or in the industrial zones, but I definitely think that we need to, send out for an RFP for somebody to give us a proposal for a shelter in Vista. I feel like the motels, and there's a couple of motels and hotels even that you have listed in the zoning slide. One was if you pull up your zoning slide, it's really, really small there, but I have super good eyes and I found it. Let me see, what was that? What's the name of that? Oh, okay.
There's the Star Lodge.
That's the
and
one.
La
So the
Quinta.
Star Lodge and the Vista Inn, they're both off of Vista Way here. I feel like ideally those two would be fantastic locations. I'm not necessarily asking for like the motel program where we get funding. I actually think these locations would be good shelter locations that could provide wraparound services, behavioral health services, and it's already the footprint of housing. And it also helps with some of those reasons why people don't go to the shelters, because of the dorm feel and the not having their own bed and things. And, we can put different stipulations on how it's ran because it is ours, but collaborate with the county on that. So I am in favor of not only an emergency shelter here, but also permanent supportive housing that developers want to bring in. And that's something that's kind of echoing through the county right now is, the only way to end homelessness is make sure that they have houses to go into, and make sure that there's not a whole bunch of barriers we put in front of them in order to obtain that housing. So I, for one, just kind of want to point you in the direction to investigate with some people with more information than us as a council and say, hey, this is what my council kind of wants. At least that's what I would like. I hope we get a majority tonight that says, hey, whatever makes the most sense with the least impact on our residents and our citizens, but the highest effect on bringing our homeless, unsheltered count down. Because I think that we've heard from our citizens that they want us to do as much work on it as we can. In the litter abatement committee meeting that I was in, Caltrans actually also spoke about how they deal with homeless camps. And I've given all that information to my council as well. And I know that we take the same, process per se, as what's the risk to the community and what type of services can we provide them. We're not just out, kicking people out of where they're at. One other thing I want to make sure that's in this plan when we talk about getting people to shelters is storage. The city of San Diego has hired 3 different strike teams, 2-people teams that actually go out every day to every encampment reported. I know we don't have the funding to have strike teams go out, but they've also implemented a program called Storage Connect. All right. And a lot of the homeless individuals don't want to leave we don't take them with all of their stuff. And a lot of times they have a lot of stuff. Sometimes they even have pets. And the city of San Diego has been dealing with this for longer than we have. And I feel like they've come up with some really good programs that we could utilize. So I've provided the slides and the information and all the contacts for the regional task force and San Diego Housing Task Force and everything, so we can collaborate with them. But I really think, those are specific things that we should have in our plan is, hey, we can store yourself for you. We can, take care of your pets for a little bit, boredom, and then get you in a place and get you back on your feet. So inevitably, that's something that I want to direct you to do. So I thank you so much for this report, and I look forward to hearing from my council members as well.
Councilmember Melendez.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Deputy Mayor Green. I am really excited about this discussion and the potential for us to expand services in our community, and to see that we're not working in silos is really great. I think the conversation around partnerships and collaboration is really important. In that, the spirit of that, I chose to meet with a staff person from the Regional Task Force on the Homeless. His name is Chris, and he does the policy for their organization. And I provided minutes for our packets today, so I'm not sure if everybody has gotten a chance to see that, but there were a lot of really valuable takeaways that I was able to get from my connection with him, as well as all the information that staff has been able to provide, as well as meetings with, community members and people who have lived experience. And then the experience that I have from providing services really shows me that we're moving in the right direction to provide a shelter option. I'm a huge advocate, as you all know, for permanent supportive housing options, for affordable housing. So we really need like a complete corridor, right, of triage from you have this crisis experience, you're on the street, to you have a stable place to live. And there's a lot of interventions that we have the opportunity to implement as a community in order to make that a reality for someone to really recover from their homelessness. And in my view, just right off the bat, I don't think that we as a city need to be operating a massive operation. I don't think that it's in our best interest to have, to really think about doing high volume or big scale. I want us to produce a really effective shelter that is going to meet the need of the greatest amount of people, right? So the folks that have a hard time getting them to even come into that waiting room, right? I really want to look for opportunities where we can create and design and produce a shelter and provide services in that shelter that is going to meet people where they're at and get them to say yes to a shelter option, because that's been one of our struggles, right? In all the work that we're doing for our strategic plan to address homelessness, we still have folks that are maybe not accessing shelter, not accessing resources, declining those resources, and so forth. So I think considering a couple of things, I have some questions. First, the first one is, I appreciate the reflection on the numbers too, because looking at that, it's showing me that when we have someone out in the field, we get more accurate information. And that can go, as a philosophy for us to use as we're developing a shelter as well. So I wanted to ask about the zoning, because I think is the area that I have more need of information about. So based on what's provided here, and I'm sorry, on the slides that you provided for us, I'm not able to see a C1 zone on the map. So I'm not sure if I'm reading it incorrectly or if I'm not seeing it, but it's listed as part of the area zone for a shelter.
And that includes C1 is where is what allows for one shelter, and currently we have one shelter already operating in C1.
I see, and that's
which is
the Operation Hope shelter. Okay, that makes more sense for me. Thank you. And then, so would that mean that only in these areas, right, that are highlighted, we can have a shelter? And if we wanted to go anywhere else outside of that, we'd have to have a whole new conversation about rezoning. And what would you say is kind of overarching characterization of these zoned areas? They're definitely spread throughout the city. We have multiple, C2, 3, 1 zones and 1 zones. And are they primarily, how distant are they from certain commercial centers, or how distant are they from healthcare centers, from transit centers? So I really want to highlight the areas that would have the best placement, for a shelter. But to bounce off of Deputy Mayor Green's comment, when I was providing services for people experiencing homelessness, sometimes we would connect them to a motel stay, right, or a motel room or some sort of motel, as part of their service that they were receiving. And I found that, those were some of the motels that we would place the clients in, so the Vista Inn and even the Franciscan Inn over here. And I found that some individuals, especially when they were connected with other services, right, and they were getting support in their recovery, and they were, having access to government assistance and whatever programs that they needed to get through, that there was such a wonderful sense of ownership and agency when they had their own space. And I think that for me is a really important and innovative next step in how we're sheltering people in this crisis, by retaining as much human dignity, privacy, and, creating an environment where someone can self-actualize and they're not just surrounded constantly by the buzz and the concern of what it is for them to be homeless, but they have a private space, a bulletin board, a bed, a private moment to themselves, right? Where they're able to start to envision a life where they're in recovery from this really tragic experience of being homeless. And so one of my stipulations for us investing in a shelter opportunity is that it has accommodations and is inclusive to those that have a higher need for privacy or a higher need for, more individual space. So a motel setting would be appropriate because you have separate rooms. And, even if some of the rooms are bunked or, we have a higher volume in some rooms, perhaps keeping some units to be individual. That would also allow for people to go in to a shelter with their partners, which is a really important part of recovering from homelessness, is being able to have that support system with you if you have a partner. So that's one of the things when we're looking at considering the design, right? Are there already structures in our community in place, like a motel that can be used and converted into a shelter, which I would definitely be favorable of if we find an appropriate option and it's feasible for us. But also in design, if it were to be right from the ground up, looking into a design maybe that includes modules or includes separate units for at least part of the sheltered population that we're going to be sheltering, so that it could include those who really have a hard time saying yes to shelter options because they're in a congregate setting. And remember, we don't have to strive to do this big volume tent city operation in the city of Vista. We can have and operate a shelter that's, smaller and maybe more integrated into the local community, even if it's not specifically for Vista residents only, because consider our infrastructure as it is already and the triaging that we are doing already in our community. We have our crisis stabilization unit that we just opened recently, which is awesome. We have the potential for new permanent supportive housing. We're building more affordable housing. We're looking for all these interventions, right? And kind of in the middle, that connecting point is a shelter. And so I think having a shelter with a new approach, one that is definitely more focused on creating opportunities for self-sufficiency by encouraging, a private space for someone. I think that from my experience and from talking to folks could be really beneficial and needed in our community, especially, and I'm going to just continue on here a little bit further. Most of the models of our shelters that we have right now are La Posada, our interfaith community shelters, which are really important, right? They are that emergency crisis intervention facility, right, where everybody's triaged into that space. Those shelters were designed under a context where we didn't have an approach of behavioral health towards homelessness, right? We're moving into a new approach towards homelessness that is more concerned about, behavior and mental well-being and kind of the whole person versus the criminal element to that person's circumstances. So when we're designing a new product of a shelter, we want to make it reflect our new approach and make it look like an environment where someone feels safe to enter, and really try to see accessibility as being not just a requirement, right, like an ADA requirement, but looking at all the barriers as to why people say no over and over again, and start to address the chronically homeless population here in Vista by providing a better kind of shelter option. And again, that is a very unique situation for someone to, not be able to be in a cohabitative environment. That's where I think maybe doing a hybrid model, right, where some of the shelter can be a little bit more private for individuals who maybe need a better space to transition, and others can be more congregate based on those needs. And I think that depending on the area where we can have that shelter, we might be able to serve a higher or smaller number of people. But I definitely want to express to my council in this discussion that I'd like for us to focus more on having a shelter that's effective in helping people recover from homelessness over, having a high volume operation and meeting some numbers in that way, because I really want to have it be a space for recovery for people. And I think the last thing I'll say on this end is about the community participation. I really believe that this is an opportunity for us to develop some sort of ad hoc committee for this particular project. I'm not sure what the rules are. Perhaps our city attorney or city manager can explain those to me, because I'm not familiar with forming separate committees as part of our council work. But I think that having an ongoing group of community members to meet and discuss this shelter would be, a perfect way for it to be cared for at every step of the process. As you were saying before, different decisions might make the timeline longer or shorter. So we need a dedicated group of people in a form of a committee to get together and to continue to work out any of the kinks or problems that might come up with a project of this size, right? Because it really is a big endeavor for us to be looking into building a shelter. And I personally would love to serve on any kind of committee regarding a homeless shelter, if it would be at the pleasure of my fellow council members, or whatever that looks like. So that is what I would really like to advocate for: a shelter that is small but effective, can prioritize privacy for people and, self-actualization and their own personal dignity, and to put together an ad hoc committee so that we can continue to move it forward in a way that's going to be best for the community. So I'd love to hear from everyone else. Thanks.
Councilmember Franklin.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. One of the things I want to ask, if we can, when we present, we talk about Exodus's social worker. I'd like us to talk about the city's social worker, the city's social worker, as the council has authorized and made the city taxpayers funds available for that. And I want the people of Vista to know that the city is providing that, and that it's something that we've directed and we've funded. So if we could reimagine the way we refer to that, I think it would be important, because we're trying to educate people on what the actions are that we've already undertaken, and we want them to know that we are taking constructive measures to try and solve the problem. When you presented to us last, you presented the total number of nights that we utilized the shelter beds that we contracted for with La Posada and Interfaith. We had not used all of them. So we have not used all that we have paid for. And, as sometimes government does, I think we get the cart ahead of the horse and we get excited about a solution to a problem. But I want to make sure that we have a full-fledged conversation about, is there an actual need for this particular facility? And I think before we go asking for an RFP, I think we have to define, what do we want the RFP to look like? I am not satisfied for staff to come up with that answer. I do not desire staff to come back with this is what staff wants. This needs to be a council discussion. Is it going to be wraparound? Is it going to be low barrier? Who's it going to serve? Where's it going to be located? How big is it going to be? How is it going to be constructed? Who might potentially operate it? These are all questions that truly need to be addressed at some primary stage before we go willy-nilly with an RFP. Once there's an RFP written by staff and it comes back to us, we're going to be in an up or down situation with folks who have invested significant time and monetary resources to prepare a proposal. And we're going to be put to the question of yes or no on whether we accept one of the responses to the RFP. So I think that's, and we don't have a history of working collaboratively as a council with staff on drafting RFPs. I mean, we're going to have an RFP come back to us, and we'll have a limited opportunity for discussion before that RFP is made public. So I'm really concerned about getting way ahead of ourselves here on something that this is not something that is not going to have unintended consequences. We know that this is going to have consequences that we don't intend or imagine. And so I think it's incredibly important that we talk these details through. Now, I'm just going to lay a philosophy out there. We have been applied with this philosophy that says that any human being has a right to live anywhere they like. But yet, for some reason, when I go to Malibu and Beverly Hills and Rancho Santa Fe, they tell me I can't afford to live there. And I don't think it's fair. And I want to have a house there, but they won't let me. I don't know what happened. I woke up one day and human beings all of a sudden enjoyed a right to live anywhere they pleased, whether it's on my front yard or whether it's in the city of Vista or it's downtown Beverly Hills, or I want to live in the middle of Central Park. I want to have a penthouse apartment in Manhattan. Do I have such a right? I'm not aware constitutionally or lawfully that I do, either in the state of California or the United States of America. I'm calling this out as bogus. You don't have a right to live wherever you like. You just don't. As much as some people may think that that would be a righteous thing, it's not a reality under our system of government or laws. But yet we're being cowed and, forced to act as if we accept that up is down and down is up. The sky is black, the ocean is white. I mean, where did the laws of physics go? Am I still living in the real world, or is this some kind of is this a Twilight Zone episode? I don't understand. I truly don't. Because one of the reasons that we're having this conversation about building a shelter in Vista is that the shelter that we have that is, and by the way, I can draw a line from where I live to La Posada, and that line is a much shorter distance than, say, the Star Lodge on Emerald. Well, according to the new logic, that's not okay. You have to build one in my neighborhood because it's too far. And the city boundaries aren't, it's where I want to live. It's how I want to identify, right? So you have to build it in my neighborhood. It's not okay to build it further away than where it is now, even though it's within the boundaries of the city of Vista. It's an arbitrary boundary, right? The city boundaries are arbitrary. I mean, what's more relevant to me as a person is how far it is from where I live. So if the shelter we build is further than the shelter we already have, but it's not within the boundaries of the city, does that make it more righteous? I mean, I'm not being facetious at all. I'm being 1,000% serious here. We need, as a council, to lay down what our philosophy is, and we need to answer the question about whether or not we believe that there is a constitutional or an entitlement from God or the flying spaghetti monster or wherever you believe that your values come from. Where does the right to live wherever you please come from? Now, I chose Vista because it was a place that I thought was beautiful and clean and safe, and I could afford to live here. And the latter, that I could afford a home here, was not a small part of the calculus, because there are many wonderful places to live in this country. We have 5 separate forms of transportation that we provide at our city taxpayers' expense to those persons suffering homelessness to transport them to the shelters. I have repeatedly met with the staff who's presenting here. I've asked our city manager. We have UberScript. We have the FACT program from NCTV. Our sheriff's department present a last transportation mode, a mode of last resort, if you will. I have personally proposed and would propose again that we provide a minivan. We were going to buy a minivan and drive around and ask people if they wanted to go to the day center. I had suggested that we reprogram that minivan and we equip it to be safe and hygienic for our social workers so that they could use the van to transport people, because we had a previous social worker that was using a personal vehicle, and I felt that that was not safe or advisable. And I said, why don't we provide a vehicle with a COVID barrier and big enough where the person can put their belongings in the back if they need to, an animal, okay? So if transportation is the issue, we also, we have, and we've all, I think at this point, walked along with the cops team and the social worker. We're handing bus passes out to anybody that wants one. Okay. Not that they check, with very low fare collection on our NCTD platforms, as does MTS. But the point is, if you can't afford the fare on the bus or the train, it absolutely will be given to you. So you have the ability to get transportation, whether it's by Uber or the sheriff or from our social worker, our city staff. We have many modes of transportation available. No one has explained to me, other than to come forward and put their finger in my nose and insistently tell me that people have a right to be sheltered in the place of their choice, which somebody help me get there. Somebody help me to understand that. And also, please, somebody help me to understand why we would discuss building a resource when we have presently contracted for a resource that is identical to the same, and we have not exhausted the supply of that resource. And we have not explored acquiring additional resources at a contract basis. We're paying $20,000 a year per shelter bed, and we're seeing numbers here that go from $25,000 to $46,300, and I did the math on it. So we're saying there's something deficient about the shelter that we're providing now. It's not the location. We know that, because locations are being shown to me on a map that's on our screen right now that are more distant than the locations that we presently are offering. Okay, so it's not the distance. You can't claim that. You can't, because you're showing me locations that are further away. So what you're saying is it has to be within this arbitrary boundary, but federal law, you've just told us, will not allow us. We have 427 people that we've had conversations with who are homeless in Vista. We're not going to build a shelter facility for 427 people. We can't afford that. We don't know. We haven't discussed yet how many people we're going to accommodate with this facility. I mean, we've got to be business minded here, and we've got to say, is this 20 people? Is it 10? Is it 50? It matters very much, because as the people who run these shelters will tell you, you have staff, and one staff person, let's call it $70,000 with benefits and the whole range of what it costs to employ someone. If I divide that over 10 people, it's $7,000 per year. If I divide it over 20 people, it's $3,500 per year. And that scales. How many staff people do we have? That's the most expensive part of paying for any housing, is the very highly trained mental health professionals, physical health professionals. Over at Interfaith, they have a health clinic. You have a cook at La Posada. You have a cook at Interfaith. When you spread these costs over a larger base of individuals, say 50 or more, you get a great efficiency of scale. When you spread it over 10 or 20 people, there's no efficiency of scale. The costs could wind up being 3 times more than we can provide the same services in a closer location, but just outside of the bounds of our city. I mean, these are real questions that the taxpayers demand that we answer. And we just don't have the answers to these important questions in front of us right now. I'm asking, is there anybody in the room tonight who can answer the question about the fact that we haven't exhausted the supply we've paid for? We've paid for a supply that the taxpayers, have afforded that has not been utilized fully. Does anybody have an answer to that? I mean, so that's where I'm going to say, unless we've got testimony from a number of sources who say, there's no more shelter to be had at Interfaith. There's no more shelter to be had at La Posada. I haven't had an opportunity. I've had a couple of missed calls from Cindy Taylor, and I'm looking very much, hopefully, to have a conversation with her tonight about their plans to expand. Perhaps they would like to expand, and there'd be great efficiency in their expansion, because it wouldn't be constructing a completely new facility with new staffing requirements, be adding to what they have. I'm very interested to hear about that. But, look, it's not just we're not just here to have compassion to provide services, because we all have that. We're here to think through a business case for how we do this that makes sense with the taxpayers' dollars. So I'm extremely concerned that we're about to get the cart well ahead of the horse tonight without answering, without even asking some extremely important questions. I really hope that we can go through these questions, that we can make the case as a community that there is in fact an actual need for the shelter. I mean, we've been through this whole list of reasons that people reject the shelter. We know that we're offering the shelter. We know people are rejecting it in great numbers. To me, this is the log in our eye. We're focused on the splinter. We're talking about the fact that we want to build more shelter capacity when it hasn't even been discussed that we've run out of the capacity that we've already paid for. And yet the big problem we have is that out of 427 people living on the streets, we had, 44 that we had an outcome where they actually went to the shelter. So, we're talking 10%, which actually is great. That's phenomenal. But we need to double that number. If we were having a conversation tonight as a council about how we double the number of people who accept that help, that would be one thing. Now, when we talk about the design of the shelter, I don't know anything about building a shelter. Not the first thing. I know that Operation Hope has, I refer to them as cells, and in the same way that, the term cell was devised by the monks, not by prisoners, okay? It's an individual room, and they have their own secure, closed space. For a family, I certainly think that makes sense. I do not know why Interfaith and La Posada have built congregate open bay areas, but I bet they do. I bet they know why they built their shelter that way. I bet they talked with other people who built shelters. I bet there's a reason. I don't know what it is. Maybe they've decided that's no longer the state of the art for shelters, but I certainly know that the five of us ought not to be deciding architecturally what works best. We need to bring people in who know the answer to that question. I mean, there's not one person that works for the city of Vista, am I wrong, Mr. Manager, who's qualified to opine on the state of modern architecture and its best design for shelters? Do we employ such a person?
We don't employ such a person, but through a process, we would be asking people who may have expertise in this to provide that to us.
What would that look like?
Well, that's the RFP process we're talking about.
Well, so are we going to start with an architect? Or are we going to start?
No, where a developer, along with the service provider, would bid out on an RFP and carry with them an architect and the appropriate design folks that could provide that information to us, if that's where the council wants to go.
Well, the other problem that I have seen is there seem to be folks who are motivated based on their potential to receive a contract. And this is a concern. Are we going to be advised by those individuals who potentially benefit from a contract, or are we going to, do we have access to someone? And why, before we go to RFP, would we not enter a consulting agreement and have a conversation and do some study work, with somebody who could advise us on this subject matter?
If that is the wish of the council, we could certainly do that.
Well, I don't see that if we can't answer the central question about the fact that we purchased shelter beds, we did not use all of them. Do we have shelter bed available right now?
I believe so. I'd ask Ms. Daniels to answer that.
Tonight, there are no shelter beds available.
Okay, and how many nights, and that we've been paying for shelter beds for about 1 year now?
Yes.
And how many nights out of the past 1 year, before we released our beds to be filled by folks, because our agreement says, they're going to prefer, but how many nights have there not been a bed for somebody from Vista?
I don't have that information in front of me. I can provide it for you as a follow-up.
Yeah, that's super central to this question. I mean, if we're not going to ask the question about need and about supply of resources and having exhausted that supply, then I just don't think we're ready to move forward to the next step of going to build an RFP. I think we need to have a debate and I mean an academic discussion about whether the need exceeds the capacity that is available to us now. That's, in a business, and no, government is not a business. We don't exist to make a profit. But in business, before we order something, we ask first, do we already have that item in inventory? And when we do go to purchase an item, we ask, would it make most sense for us to own that item, for us to lease that item? Do we want to buy a year's supply, or do we want to buy a week's supply? These are important questions to ask and answer. So I've said a lot. I'm sorry for the long-windedness, but I'm really, really concerned that we're, and remember, the next step on this is to come back and have a conversation with our neighbors present here and pick a location. And that's going to be a conversation of great interest to the community. So I, for one, would like to have all of these questions answered before we get to that point, because our people that we represent are going to have a great deal of interest in that subject. So that's what I'm asking.
And Councilman, just to clarify, while we don't have the specifics of the shelter beds in terms of how many specific nights we had availability, I think it is safe to say, and we've said it before at other meetings, that at least the beds at Interfaith, there typically is at least a bed available. La Posada is a little different situation.
Well, I've asked at nearly every council meeting what the availability of shelter beds was, and at nearly every meeting, Mr. Johnson has told me that there are beds available. If there are not beds, can we acquire more? We're only contracting for 10 right now. Can we contract for 20 before we build our own shelter? And wouldn't it make sense to do that? We haven't even had the discussion or asked the question. That question deserves an answer before we would go forward in this. But most important, I think you've got to ask the question about there's a parabola where we know it's least efficient to operate a shelter for one person, and it's maximally efficient to operate for, solve for X. And maybe there's some point beyond that where there's a declining marginal efficiency. Okay. We don't know what that optimal efficiency number is of beds, but we should know so that we can ask and answer that question about what kind of a shelter. We talked about we don't want to build one too big. We want to have privacy for everybody. But how many beds? Is this 50 beds? Is it 20 beds? That's an important thing that we need to decide as a council, how big this thing's going to be. And we need to talk more about this fact that, I'm just going to say staff has lodged major concerns with this council about the fact that building this service could in fact exacerbate the problem in Vista that we're currently experiencing. The fact that staff presents to us tonight, the fact that we cannot go out and reserve this space for those people who are homeless on the streets of Vista means that does Carlsbad have a low barrier shelter? I think the answer is no.
La Posada is in Carlsbad.
La Posada is not low barrier.
It is low barrier.
Technically, yes.
I've been told for
La Posada and Haven House are both our low barrier shelters, and that's why people go there.
But you can't go to La Posada if you're using narcotics.
You're not allowed to use at the facility, but there are no drug testing in order to enter the facility.
Okay. Well, that's different than how it's been presented to me in the past, but I'm happy to hear that that's the option there. I don't know. We've had that discussion about La Posada many times, and I've never heard it described as low barrier. But the bottom line is, there are other cities. We're gonna, we have to ask the question. We already have Operation Hope. We already have Solutions for Change. We have a lot of services, as staff has made us aware, and we have to ask a question, because it's a question that people that live here want to know the answer to. Does building an ever greater quantity of services here make the problem worse here? And for the people who live here, that's a question they expect us to answer. It's a loaded question, but I have to ask it because I've been sitting here by the people to ask that question. Amongst the other questions, which is how do we best take care of people who need to be taken care of? I want to do that too, but I'm not so eager to be seen as caring before I am considering of these important questions. I want everybody to know that we're considering all of the angles to this. Thank you.
And just to answer your last question, which was, are there other shelter beds available for purchase? So we currently do 10. Could we do 15? And the answer is no at this time. Until one of those shelters expands and opens up more beds, we are limited to the 10.
Even though we once had 10 at Interfaith, and now we're down to 5 at Interfaith.
It was 5 and 5.
No, we started out with 10 at Interfaith.
No, I believe we've always had 5 at Interfaith, 5 at La Posada. I'd ask Ms. Lee or Ms. Daniels to clarify that.
That's correct. And it fluctuates. So if there is availability at one versus the other, they'll accept them regardless of the bed count.
And again, we're never just limited to 10 beds. There could be 20 Vista residents. They just give a preference for us, but there could be more Vista residents at those shelters besides those 10.
Okay, thank you.
And probably the shelters are fuller because of the weather. Yesterday raining and it's been cold and at night, so maybe the shelters are fuller. So that takes to Councilmember Contreras.
Well, I want to thank staff, my coworkers on staff, for putting together yet another report. I 100% believe in your abilities to help guide the council in a type of discussion like this. There's been a lot of questions presented, and I think that we've already addressed them and have received answers. Perhaps maybe we're not always happy with the answers that we received. Last council meeting where we discussed homelessness, we had Greg from Interfaith, and he, being the expert in the field more than we are, he outlined reasons why we need a shelter here in Vista. So I don't know how many more experts we need to come forward. Certainly doing nothing has created a situation where we have more residents experiencing homelessness. So I really don't know what other answers we're looking for. When it comes to La Posada, which is the closest shelter that we are, essentially renting beds, that is for single men only. So even if I, were a single man and tomorrow at 9 a.m. I decide I want to make it to La Posada, I have to walk 16 minutes to bus 332, and then I have to afford a lift. It's going to take me 4 minutes for a total of 41 minutes just to get to the shelter. If I don't have money for a lift, my other option is to walk, and I'm from here. If I was right here and I wanted to get to La Posada tomorrow at 9 a.m. Would be my start time. I would have to walk 15 minutes from this building to get to the Sprinter. Then I would have to transfer to bus 309, and then I would have to walk 12 minutes. If that is not available for me, then I have another option. And also that trip one way is 1 hour and 18 minutes. If I wanted to choose a different option, I could walk 16 minutes from this location, get bus 302, transfer to bus 309, and it would take me 1 hour and 44 minutes to get to La Posada. If I was looking for yet another option, I would have to walk 8 minutes from here to get to bus 318. I would have to walk 4 minutes to get to another bus, and another 12 minutes to get to La Posada. It would take me 2 hours and 2 minutes. If I'm a female who needs to be in a low barrier setting, I'm not even going to look up how long it's going to take to get to Escondido, but it would be a long time. We have no low barrier shelter here in the city of Vista. We have none. It's an issue, and if it weren't an issue, then we wouldn't be seeing the increase in homelessness. And it's not just this year, it has been increasing year over year. And it will only get worse. That's what the people of Vista continue to tell us, right? We see this caricature right? Which is the individual who is chronically homeless, right? They have a shopping cart, they have, all their belongings. That's who we see. That's the tip of the iceberg. Okay. So we can debate forever and create nothing and continue debating. But it's really not a debate. We're talking about, and maybe not everybody believes that housing is a human right, but it is. You deserve to have shelter. And when we're discussing building a shelter, no, location does not, everything besides location does not make something identical. Location is an element that needs to be addressed when we're talking about shelters. In fact, that's, again, our expert Greg last time told us. We can go and we can talk to more experts, but I think for some of us, it doesn't matter what the answer is with it. So we have, for a year, been able to get really good data with our social worker. And the amount of individuals who we've communicated with who are unduplicated, that 427 number, for us to have had individuals being able to not just sleep outside, but have a shelter and have access to wraparound services for 1,809 nights. I think that was the last figure that we had at the last presentation. That's a huge success. That was an 11% success rate. And we were told that actually is pretty high. So when we're looking at a population of 427, which we know will only increase, that number is not going to go down. It will go up without any interventions. 427 individuals, if we could just move a few more into shelter, that success rate goes up a lot because we're talking about a pretty small pool of individuals. So, I would love to make sure that when we're discussing metrics that are meaningful. We want to reduce the amount of homelessness here in the city of Vista, and we absolutely need to. I went to General Murray High School. I don't even know when it was, if it was last week or whatever. But, one of the number one questions that they had, it was transportation. How come we don't have a bus stop right next to our school, right? So if we have, just individuals that don't have behavioral or mental health issues that have a hard time getting from one place to another, we can't say that it is okay to have shelters so far away. That is just not okay. Especially, we have the ability to do something, and we need to do something. In fact, that is why we were elected. We were elected to do something about these persistent issues that have continued to grow because we have not done what we need to do, which is shelter individuals. When it comes to the architecture of the building, that's something that, just like when any developer comes to us, suddenly we're experts then, and we can say, hey, you know what? I don't like this. I don't like that. But when we're talking about a shelter, suddenly we can't discuss that. It's not within our purview. And so that's really confusing to me. I do want to say that I appreciate Councilmember Melendez discussing, perhaps a hybrid model that is congregate with personal space. Our social worker working with these individuals, they have a whole case that's being built. There's a management system. Perhaps we can identify those who would best fit their own personal room versus someone that maybe needs to be in a congregate setting. And when we're discussing a shelter, transportation is huge. Being able to access transportation is huge. When I was at La Posada in Carlsbad, it was hard. I didn't get there fast enough, and I had to park down the hill, and I had to walk all the way up the hill, right? And so when I was there, I was like, hey, what's transportation like? They're like, you know what? It's actually really difficult for people to get here. So transportation and location, those are barriers to success. And we have to understand them as such. And if we don't understand them, then maybe we need to ask more questions to those who have lived experience and get some more feedback, because that's the kind, it's not just compassion that we want to have for individuals. Obviously, that is like a baseline, right? We want to have compassion as a baseline. But we want to be proactive. We want to be strategic, as our plan identifies the word strategic plan in it. We want to be comprehensive, and we want mutual benefit, right? The individuals who were able to spend 1,809 nights in a shelter, that is, I'm so glad we were able to do that. And to think that we could have many more individuals participating in maybe going to a shelter for the first time. Maybe it's their third time. Maybe it's their 10th time. But with all these different services that regionally we are putting together, and that the County of San Diego is pushing really hard to have a more comprehensive plan to address homelessness, because it can happen to anybody. We're not talking about individuals who have a bank account and money and employment and are ready to go find and purchase a home somewhere. That is a completely, not a good way to compare the situation. We're talking about individuals who need help. And if we can identify the areas in which they need help, some of them are going to be able to reintegrate into society and might come here and, thank us one day. And some, we are just going to have to help for the remainder of their lives. And I'm okay with that. So I'm just going to make a motion that we accept staff's recommendation to pursue an RFP, draft a request for proposal for developers to propose a low barrier shelter, because we have discussed over and over again, low barrier shelter is what is needed. We have 2 low barrier shelters under contract, but we have no low barrier shelters here in the city of Vista, and location makes the biggest difference. I cannot face the residents here in the city of Vista and said I did everything I can if I don't try this.
Okay, before we go around again, I just will make a few comments. It looks like everybody's gonna push the buttons again one more time. So I just thinking about a space of their own, whether it be an apartment, if it's not a motel, then where do you build it? Where's the spot? Where in Vista is there empty land to build something, and starting from scratch? Where do you do that? And a space of their own. A good percentage of the homeless people are substance abusers, and so apparently it just said low barrier, you can be using the drugs but not in the location. But so who's going to monitor that? It'll have to be highly managed. I mean, who's going to and then are these just like a one-night room? They're going to have their own space for one night, or is it like an apartment? They have an apartment, and who's going to do upkeep of these apartments? The housekeeping? Does somebody come in and change the sheets and clean? I mean, who takes care of all of that? It's, highly managed. I mean, how expensive is it? The animals, the pets and things that, as the owner of a pet, they have to have shots and things. They carry diseases and spread diseases to other pets. So you can't just let pets in. So, that was one of the reasons that they didn't want to come in. That was one of the reasons they gave, that they didn't want to, couldn't have their pets or too many pets or emotional support animals. And nowadays everybody gets a letter that their animal is an emotional support animal. So, I have a problem with that. So the other thing is, there have to be counseling and staff, the service, that they have to provide like ongoing all the time that would be very expensive. And so the bottom line for me is, where's all the money going to come from? And even if we have money this year because we have, our budget's okay in this year, this is once you have that shelter, it doesn't go away in a couple years. This is an ongoing thing for a lot of years. And it's, how much is it a year to run a shelter? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I think $25,000 to $50,000 per bed.
Per bed, $25,000 to $50,000 per bed. And so, depending. So if even if it's a small shelter, that's a huge chunk that comes out of your general fund or somewhere. Nobody gives us that money. That's, the ongoing expense. I'm concerned about the ongoing expense of something like that. So I'll just throw my 2 cents in there, and then we'll start over here. Let's see, Councilmember Melendez.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I do appreciate you sharing your concerns about how the facility would be managed. I think our current shelter options that we contract with, La Posada and Interfaith, show a really great example of how to manage a high number of people and, a lot of people staying perhaps long-term or, for a decent amount of time in that space. So I think that there's a lot of great questions and an appeal to bring in expertise and that can answer some of those questions, right? How is it actually functioning in a way that is going to be cost effective, but also effective in reducing recidivism? So folks that are in the shelter and that we are, paying for the cost of, $25K to $50K per bed, that it's effective, right? We're not experiencing such high amounts of recidivism, which is where I'm finding some of my inspiration for my recommendations and my suggestions for something that does prioritize private space and self-sufficiency in that, that own personal space a little bit more, because I think that can go a long way in helping someone take pride in their space to keep it clean, right? But also to have the motivation to move forward. And one of my tasks of my due diligence to prepare for this meeting was to meet with an expert, and I did provide the minutes from that meeting to be added to this packet. But I did want to reflect on some of the questions that I asked him and some of the responses that he gave, just so that we could all benefit from that information. A really important start of the conversation, Mr. Chris Kuntz expressed, if we offer the right thing, people will say yes. So transitional housing is a 2-year model, and a low barrier emergency shelter model is not a specified time frame, and it's operated in a way that reaches more people. So what we're trying to develop at the City of Vista level would be a small shelter, right? I in my opinion, if I'm just going to be using my imagination here, it would be maybe 50 people, right? And it could be a hybrid model of a congregate area and then a percentage set aside that is a private space, or maybe separate rooms, separate units, separate modules, separate home, whatever it is, right? Separate that could encourage, a more private space or be accommodating for families as well. And it would be low barrier. So what that means is that you don't have to be, at a super stable place in your recovery in order to have a place to sleep. But you do have to follow certain rules and safety requirements by not using substances at the facility. So just because it's low barrier and you can access it without being, 30 days clean, for example, that doesn't mean that you can just do whatever you want. You still have to be respectful and follow rules so that you can concern yourself with the safety of everybody at the facility. So I think that's the approach to low barrier that is valuable, is that to get into the facility, there's no barriers. If you, are eligible for it, maybe you would be eligible for a more private space, right? If maybe you've been chronically homeless for 3 years, for example, and maybe you'd be more eligible for a congregate space, and that would be a better option for you. But it would be, 50 beds, and it would be managed by I would prefer a local organization or a community-based organization that is providing evidence-based and trauma-informed services to be the one to be providing the services in a shelter or housing setting. And I think one of the recommendations that Chris made in my meeting with him was to get an organization working with our city as soon as possible at the very beginning of the formation of a shelter, so that it could be sort of an additional guiding force, right? So we have that expertise at every level of planning. The other concern, is we do want to consider the shelter's locations, and accessibility means low barrier, but it also means how people are going to be able to access that in the community as well. We want to put it in a location where people can access things like the DMV, healthcare facilities, jobs, public transit, but also their own community. So in my set of personal values, the Constitution of the United States of America is not my primary guiding light and document. If I, am to be truthful to my own values, if I know a neighbor is on the street and I have an opportunity to extend a resource and a hand to them, either in my advocacy or in my personal life, I will do that, because that is one of the guiding values that I carry with me. And so that's the kind of representation that I'm providing. I do care about being compassionate, but we want to take an evidence-based approach. And moving forward with a smaller shelter is something that the expert at the Regional Task Force on the Homeless expressed to me, that many cities are going to probably be looking to take an approach having smaller shelters in their community. In an ideal world, I think that we'd have a shelter in every district, right? A smaller, maybe home-based shelter in every district and every community, right? Not where we're shipping people off cities away, but that we're integrating people into the community. How much easier does it make it for us to integrate them into the general community after a time of recovery from their homelessness? So I think that operating a shelter, opening a shelter, and producing a shelter in the city of Vista is a phenomenal idea. I do want to make sure that I get all my questions answered, and I want to respect the motion that's on the floor. But first I need to get some clarification, perhaps from our city manager. What is the process for us establishing an ad hoc committee for developing a shelter in the city of Vista? And is it possible for myself to serve on ad hoc committee? What would it look like for a community-based and collaborative board or committee to come together to work on this project?
I guess it depends if you want to do a council ad hoc committee, or it sounds like you'd prefer a council community-based ad hoc committee.
Yes.
The process could be the council deciding on how many members that each council member or the mayor would have on that committee, similar to some of our commissions, where each member gets one seat on the commission as an example, and the mayor in some cases gets one or more, and then you have partners that fulfill that as well.
Okay,
But
well,
it's entirely up to the city council.
if I could just put out a recommendation and to amend, if I could, your initial motion to include an ad hoc committee of 6 members, which are 5 appointed from the council and the mayor, and 1 council person, or perhaps is this a violation of the rules if there's 2 council members, perhaps 2 representing council members and a community member from each district can be appointed. I'm going to recommend that. So 2 council members and let's say 5 community members appointed by the council to serve on an ad hoc committee to plan and develop a RFP for the city of Vista to develop a shelter in the city of Vista. So I would like to uphold Councilmember Contreras' original motion and amend it with that stipulation.
I accept the amendment.
Great.
Okay, Councilmember Green, or Deputy Mayor Green, sorry.
No problem. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Okay, so I wrote down a whole lot of stuff here. So first of all, I like the idea of specificity when it comes to, or however you say that long word with all those adjectives, as far as what I want the RFP to look like. I believe Councilwoman Melendez was on the right track. I expected it to be within our zoning guidelines, 50 beds up to 60 beds, possibly no larger than that. I also do want to provide wraparound services and full services at this shelter. Additionally, I only want it to be in non-residential areas for now, like in the zoning right there, industrial, C2, C3. I also want to have different types of occupancy. So yeah, it's going to be 60 beds, but we may have some rooms that facilitate 4 beds, some rooms that facilitate 2 beds, and then some rooms that may facilitate 1 bed. Obviously, we're not going to put an active drug user in a single occupancy room. I would think it would be something that is kind of earned after a while, perhaps on a shelter. But again, the RFP and the people who run the shelter will be able to give us the exact, stipulations on that. But I do think that there should be different types of occupancy because that is unique and that is a reason we've heard people are turning down services. The reason why I think we need to build a shelter is because the numbers say we need to build a shelter. People are turning down these beds because of the structure of the shelter and also the location and also the accessibility of the shelter. I truly think, and if you read Governor Newsom's $100 billion California comeback plan, a quote from Governor Newsom is this: "I don't think homelessness can be solved. I know it can be solved. The state has provided unprecedented financial resources and opportunities to local governments to address street homelessness, but it takes local leaders to turn it into action. Our vision on homelessness must be realized at the local level." What that means to me is we have to do something. What we've been doing hasn't been working. That's why it has increased. Our governor is going to make us put a shelter in our city, and he's going to make us put 200 people in that shelter, and it's going to be 10 stories, and it's going to be in your neighborhood, and it's going to be in my neighborhood, and it's going to be in their neighborhood. The whole reason we're doing this right now is because we want to maintain local control, and we want to be able to take all of the opinions of this council and put them into fruition for our community. So I feel like, my opinion with this is I've never been a huge fan of shelters because I know the element that they bring to the community. However, shelters have been ran so much differently with so much more respect and so much more care for the community than ever before. And I really feel like if we do this right now as a council, it's going to be like drinking from a faucet instead of drinking from a fire hose. I don't know if you've ever tried to drink from a fire hose, but you don't get much nourishment from it. And if the state puts mandates on us that forces us to do this, our discussions are all totally invalid and nobody cares about them. Take SB 8 and 9, for instance. We don't build enough housing. We're putting 4 units on every one of your residential lots. Should have approved more housing. We don't approve a shelter? Good news. We're putting a shelter in your city. So this is our opportunity as a council that was elected. Unfortunately, I don't support the ad hoc committee because I feel like that's kind of ballot box planning. We were all elected to do this. I really think we should direct staff to do the RFP as Karina initially stated with our specifics as far as size goes, occupancy, location. I also don't think they should build a brand new structure. I think these junk motels and hotels with the structure would be ideal, and hopefully some of the RFPs that come in would give us that option. But if there is a ground up one that's possible in our zoning, show it to me. If it's not feasible, let's not approve it. Super easy. But I think that we have to look into this because if we don't do it right now, it's going to be forced on us. So I've really thought about this shelter a lot. In the city of Vista, we do offer a lot of options, and treating homelessness, there is no one solution to it. We currently have a CSU that just opened. We have affordable housing. We have transitional housing through North County Lifeline. We also have permanent sustainable housing coming in through different developers. What we don't have is emergency shelters and actual permanent supportive housing. So those are the two things that we're really supposed to be concentrating on. And I don't think our argument of, is it necessary or whatever, I don't even think that has merit, because the numbers and the data that we've received have kind of shown that if we don't do something about it, the data everybody's looking at is going to force our hand. So as opposed to being forced, I feel like this is a fantastic compromise. It has a little bit of conservative in it, some of the liberal side of it, and then also a big, huge community-based focus of people who love our town. Sacramento doesn't give a junk about Vista, okay? But each one of us do. Katie and I are Longhorns, baby. I got a Vista Panther right there, and I got two people who've been in Vista for 20 years that love this community. So we all want to work together to provide something amazing to our community that's not going to have too much of a focused impact. And knowing that the governor of our state is saying, I have the money. Where's the money? Boom, right here, okay? And there wasn't this much money for homelessness 5-6 years ago, just like there wasn't this much money for litter abatement and homeless, litter abatement, all this stuff. They're throwing money at this like crazy. And if we as a council don't come up with a solution to say, hey, we want to bring feasible solutions to our community, they're going to be forced upon us. So I don't support that amendment. However, I would offer a substitute motion, and my substitute motion would be that we accept staff's recommendation. They had it on their little slide right here, so I'm going to find it. Sorry, got a lot of slides here. So I think that we should accept staff's recommendation to draft a request for proposal for the developers to propose a low barrier shelter. We also should direct staff to continue regional collaborative discussions and come back to us based off of the general direction of the council, 50 to 60 beds maximum, occupancy, all the things that I stated earlier, okay? So that's the motion that I'm making in substitute to your motion. I feel like it caters to all of our desires and that it will bring an amazing product and service to the city of Vista.
Councilor Franklin, but also remember Newsom, that thing, he's only going to be there, who knows how long he'll be there, and the money might go away after a couple of years. So once you do this, it's a commitment for many years. So just so you know that.
I'm confident of the humanitarian state of our state of California, regardless of who's in power, that they will be working hard on this.
Okay, Councilmember Franklin.
So I stand by the fact that the questions that I'm posing are important, but I do not mean to express that I don't support moving forward with the discussion about building a shelter. And I don't mean to suggest that I don't believe that there might be a need, but I would like to see it mathematically demonstrated. I mean, I would have liked to have seen that we exhausted the supply that we paid for before we got to this point. And, I am not aware. I don't disagree with your point that eventually the state may force it. I'm not aware that there's discussion to do that, but I agree with your point that it could eventually happen. I take no disagreement there. I did not say that we shouldn't be discussing the architecture. I want to discuss the architecture, but I want to hear from those who operate shelters. If we're going to get the opportunity, I'm here 7 years on the council. Staff has not given me one opportunity to have a discussion with multiple respondents to an RFP. Not one time. Not one time. Is this going to be different? Is council going to get to hear the different? I want to see the different proposals. I think I see nodding heads. I think council wants to see the different proposals, and we want to talk through the different ideas. We don't want this done in a back room. We want to. I don't have a choice. I can't call 3 of my colleagues and have this discussion over the phone. The Brown Act says we got to have it all right here. So whatever questions I have to ask, if they're stupid or they don't sound right, I got to ask them right up here. And so I'm happy to ask whatever questions I have to ask to get it out there. But I don't support the ad hoc committee either. I think, ultimately, just like with the Planning Commission, the council has the authority to overrule the Planning Commission, and occasionally we find ourselves in that situation. So I don't think it makes sense to create an ad hoc committee where there would be, potentially controversy about whatever the product of it is. I was the one that asked that we create a highest level goal in our goal setting session, that we make homelessness a top level goal. Somehow we got that combined in our last goals into a sub goal. I was not happy about that. I'm going to ask at our next goal setting that homelessness be again elevated to a number one goal. In fact, I think it should be the number one goal. That was out of that came the strategic plan. We have taken extraordinary steps to attempt to address this. It is not the case that we have done nothing. That is just patently wrong. We talk about transportation. I took 2 buses and a train every day for years. It took me 90 minutes both ways to get to work. Having to walk 12 minutes is not a travesty. It might be for me because I'm not in the greatest physical shape, but I can walk 12 minutes and it won't kill me. That's how long it would take me to walk to the grocery store. If walking 12 minutes is the problem, then we've got bigger problems. So all that said, I'm going to second the substitute motion. I do want to have the conversation. I do want to discuss all these issues. But I don't want to even put the constraint on it. I'm not saying that I want it to only be 50. Maybe at 100 beds, there's vastly more efficiency of scale. I want to see the business case. That's all I'm saying. I want to see the business case. I want to see what's the most efficient, what makes the most sense, and I don't have any idea what that is. And so I wouldn't want to tie the hands of those coming before us. So, does the zoning limits it to 50? Well, is that right?
50 to 60, depending on the zone.
Okay.
Or you could go through the SUP process.
Well, we have SUPs for both of the shelters that we have now, don't we? So, look, we're going to want an SUP anyway. We're definitely going to want an SUP. I mean, SUPs create conditions. They create the ability for us to review and enforce compliance with conditions. We're going to want that. I'm not sure that that's really a problem. So I just don't want to. What I am saying is I want all options on the table. Despite the questions I'm asking, I'm not actually opposed to providing the shelter. I want to provide what makes sense. I want to provide what will be utilized. I would like to have a discussion. I think it's important. I think people want to hear us discuss whether or not we're creating something that might actually make the problem worse. I think it's a question that has to be asked. If the answer is it's a risk we have to take and we're willing to take that risk, fine. But we should be willing and unafraid to ask and answer that question. So I do have one more thought, but it's slightly irrelevant to the particular question. So I'm going to defer now to the end of this item.
Councilmember Contreras.
I'm really happy to be part of this council and the fact that we get to really dig in to these documents and collaborate, even when it seems like we're not collaborating, is still a collaborative effort, even in differences. So, and in the future, I know that there was a public comment made by Deputy Green at one of the meetings where we were addressing the strategic plan to address homelessness. And it was about safe overnight parking and how if in the future we do have a shelter and if it's conducive to safe overnight parking, then that's potentially a place where we can have that safe overnight parking. That's definitely a conversation that I think council should have as well, simply because the data that we've received from our social worker going out and speaking one-on-one, we have 427 unduplicated individuals. That's individuals that, for the most part, we're not seeing. We're only seeing a very small amount of that 427. I can't imagine how many individuals are living in their cars, and we have no data on that. And the car usually is the last type of shelter that an individual has before they become homeless. So I feel like our strategic plan to address homelessness really has this huge gap in it where we are not addressing individuals in our community where their only residence is their vehicle. And we know that vehicles are not immortal. At some point, something happens with them. So I just wanted to throw that out there for consideration. Perhaps this isn't the best time to discuss it, but I think it is something that we should discuss in the future. I too believe that we don't have to construct a facility from scratch. It would be great to take some of these, a look at some of these properties, especially because we do receive complaints from time to time from these properties. So there is a potential to have a really big public benefit where not only are we sheltering individuals and connecting them to the services that they need so they can move past their traumatic experience and experience the wonderful things that come with having shelter and stability. But, you know, there's no need to just start from scratch. And we can also, at the same time, possibly provide a public benefit in nuisance issues that some of these properties may already have. So I'm really excited about the motion that we have, and I would love to hear from Councilmember Melendez and then get a vote going on it. So thank you, everybody.
Councilmember Melendez.
Thank you, everybody, for the discussion. I love critical questions, and I think that we just have one thing unanswered, which is the community involvement piece, which was my intention with forming an ad hoc committee, was to get the community's participation. It's something I spoke about at our last meeting, discussing our strategic plan on to address homelessness, the workshops, right? Ensuring that those come back as part of at least a yearly process of updating our strategic plan to address homelessness. But what would staff need in terms of recommendations from the council going forward? So I guess the question is two parts. What is currently being conducted to include community participation or enhance community participation in our strategic plan to address homelessness? And then, you know, where are the gaps where you need feedback or you need specific direction in order to improve that?
For all council meetings, it's published for community members to participate, and we do make a concerted effort to advertise when we are discussing the strategic plan to address homelessness. In addition to that, staff is also involved in several organizations which are community-based and have a lot of community input and feedback.
And additionally, when creating the strategic plan, we reached out to numerous organizations and conducted meetings here as well. One of the things we were doing is getting feedback from over the years, seeing how the strategic plan was developing, and then we were going to go back to those groups as well. We met with business associations and also South Vista communities, and also held a forum here, and also reached out to did I say faith-based communities, and also the Businesses Association. So we were going to go back to them and say, hey, this is what the strategic plan has done. We just completed our year of our update, and then this discussion happened, and then from there we were going to go out for those updates.
Okay, awesome. I'm glad to know that city staff is initiating those conversations. What is the plan to bring back the community workshops that were established at the start of the strategic plan to address homelessness? Perhaps could there be a workshop in the spring in advance of, you know, the second year returning of our strategic plan to address homelessness? Is that on the calendar? Is that something staff is planning to do?
That's not in the current plan, but that's up to council to provide that direction to
Okay, that's
proceed.
what I'm looking for, right? Because I do see the important considerations here being that we need to have more community involvement. I thought having an ad hoc committee with community members on it would be beneficial. I hold my own meetings with community members, and y'all see when I submit the minutes for those, right? So I want us to see how can we codify that intention of engaging the community more. And in my opinion, I would like to see those workshops come back in the spring as part of, and to continue as part of a yearly process in updating our strategic plan to address homelessness. I don't know if we need to vote on that, but that's my opinion.
Well, and I think at the last meeting where we talked about the strategic plan in September, I think it was you that mentioned having that 6-month interval public meeting
Okay.
and allowing everybody to come and kind of a workshop format
Okay.
with the community. So that's not a problem.
Okay, as long as that is going forward, then I think we meet that community engagement piece on my end. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, we are lit up again. Okay. Deputy Mayor.
Like a Christmas tree, baby. No, I just want to say I support that 100%. What I was thinking is that in the event we have consensus tonight to move forward with the motion that's on the floor, it would be a great opportunity to say, hey, council just approved an RFP for a shelter. Our next homeless outreach meeting is planned for... You pick a date, please join us, and then as the council, it's a workshop we can come to. We obviously won't be talking to each other or anything, but it would be great to be boots on the ground with the community and really advertise that. And if we need to have it on the south side and the north side, do it on, one in Shadow Ridge and then, one at Luz Duran or one at City Hall. I mean, I'm totally okay with that too. But I think the more community engagement, the better. But I definitely think, we make this decision now on what we're doing, and then we get an update on everything moving forward. I think that's a good idea. And it would definitely give us more direction as a council. Thank you.
And if I could just jump in with Oceanside released an RFP for a shelter quite some time ago. Oh, not quite some time ago, but just a while ago. And they only received 2 responses. So, and they're moving forward, obviously, with one. So what we would, as staff, we would like to release the RFP and see how many responses we actually get before we overly promote, because if we get no responses and we promoted this event, we'd like to see what we need to adjust to get more responses. So, so just kind of keep that in mind with the recommendation.
Councilmember Franklin.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that I'm happy to provide guidance tonight that we'd like to have 4 workshops, one in every council district, before we get to a final acceptance of this. I mean, I would love to go out and seek the community's input in a real way and really hear from people what they think about this. I think that would be a phenomenal way to get community involvement.
And Councilmember Contreras.
I 100% agree with community involvement, and I like Councilmember Franklin's option the best, which is one in every district. That's even more. So that's good. I totally support that.
And just to clarify what I heard, is that prior to the RFP having those workshops?
Prior to approving.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, prior to council selection of a winner of the.
Yeah, out for RFP right now, after we vote.
Well, and council is going to, you're going to bring back, I assume, to council the elements of an RFP, and we're going to go through and you're going to ask for thumbs up, thumbs down on each of the elements that you want to include in the RFP. Is that correct?
That is correct, if that's what the council wishes to have.
That would be my wish. I'd like to have a full-fledged conversation about what's going to be included and what's not. Is the rest of the council all right with that? I think this is an important one.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, I don't see any more buttons. Everybody keep your hands to yourself for a moment.
I think we have direction.
Do we need a vote?
We had a motion in a second.
A motion a second. Yes, let's have a vote, please.
Madam Mayor, I did have one more piece of business on this item.
That motion passes unanimously. You have another piece of business on this item?
I do.
Before we voted? We voted.
It's not relevant to the motion that was on the table. It's call it new business, but within the boundaries of what's been agendized here. In discussion with staff, we have this is part of the strategic plan to address homelessness. In a larger sense, We have a process whereby if a business, say, has a weed abatement issue, we notice them of their violation of the code. If they're unable to rectify it, we go onto their property and we rectify it. And then, but first that comes before the city council, and the city council votes to put that on the property tax roll. Other things like graffiti and other kinds of code violations similarly. What I'm asking is for a consensus of council, ask staff to research and bring back for approval. But what I would like to see is with regard to homeless encampment cleanup, there are a number of property owners who are overwhelmed by the problem that they face, the repetitiveness of the cleanup activities which are necessary in order to come into compliance. And in the last couple of weeks, I have received an overwhelming number of complaints from residents in District 4 with regard to the increased prevalence of homeless encampments, most of which are on private property. The city has taken an increased approach towards cleaning up encampments, but many property owners are really at a loss. So what I'm asking is that we consider a model where we notice property owners, give them 7 days to solve the problem, just the way we would with a weed abatement. And if they're unable to do that, then staff would bring the issue back before council, and we would we would authorize city staff to go onto the property, solve the problem, and to collect the funds necessary to solve the problem.
Is there a question on that?
Well, I'm looking for a consensus at this point to ask council to do the legwork to make this a well-researched, thoughtful item to come back to us.
So you want it agendized? Is that what you're asking for?
Yes, but with a full complement of research rather than us having a first blush discussion of it when it comes back. So I'm asking for a consensus that the staff would do that work.
Does this have to do with his thing? Oh, okay, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
The new subject.
No problem. Yeah. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear on what the request is before I, approve or deny. So what it sounds like is, and I've had the same issue. As you guys know, there's different types of encampments. There's private property, public property, and then state or Caltrans property. And we have different ways to address all of those. So what you're asking is that we direct staff to come up with a similar ordinance, like a weed abatement ordinance that says, hey, we notice you have a homeless encampment on your property. You have 7 days to respond. If you don't respond in 7 days, we notice you again. And then after that 7 days, we clean it up. And then that bill gets tied to their tax records, similar to the weed abatement issue?
Correct.
Okay. I think I would be okay with it, obviously, in like the commercial areas. And the reason being is because a lot of these, people who have businesses are leasing their business. They're not the property owner, right, and they don't have the authority to remove a homeless encampment or do anything like that. So I would think if, these property owners, some of them are out of area property owners that don't jump. I mean, we had an encampment on the Popeyes development over there at Hacienda and Emerald Forever, and it's owned by Popeyes corporate office. And they don't care about, the barber shop over there and the other stores and things. And it took a very long time. So for me, this is something that I would support. I definitely want to make sure that it doesn't marginalize any of the property owners that, couldn't necessarily afford it. And I would want to make sure that there's some type of, maybe a grant application or something. If they say, hey, it's a financial hardship for me to allow the city to go clean out my property, that there would be some type of thing. But I do think that there has to be another mechanism, because as a council, when we get calls from our citizens and it's on private property, there's really no explanation. It's like, hey, we talk to them and they're not doing anything. This will allow us to offer services and, offer them beds, offer them different things. So I would be in favor of it as long as the humanitarian aspect remains and that we can show our community the why that we're doing it. And I would say the why is because a lot of these business owners don't actually own the property, and that's inevitably who is responsible for clearing the homeless encampment. So I think that's something that I'd like to hear brought back from an ordinance standpoint, because it gives our city more authority to clean up the encampments and offer services to our homeless population.
We currently have a nuisance abatement process that's already codified.
Okay.
So I'm not sure that we need to create a new one. maybe defer to.
What
the
is
city
that
attorney.
process and what are the fine structures and things? Because I think what Councilman Franklin wants to do is say, hey, that's obviously not working because the private property owners aren't jumping quick to clean them up in their area. So
We have not done that with homeless encampments. Where we have done it, and it's infrequent, but where there's a property that's dilapidated, that's not being cared for, that is a problem, a nuisance for the neighborhood, and code has exhausted all remedies with the sheriff's department. We have brought those cases before the council in the past to where we clean it up, we remove a structure, and then that is put on the tax rolls. It's very infrequent, though, that we do go on private property. I'll let the city attorney jump in there.
Well, we do have a process, but let us take a look at the existing process and see if there is an alternative or indeed some other policy options that we might have for approaching this problem. There may be something short of an ordinance, but more involved in the policy side that would be effective. And I can see distinctions, for example, between, as Deputy Mayor Green pointed out, commercial properties and private residential properties where this has also been a problem. And I think there are perhaps some different considerations that ought to be applied in those circumstances. Let us come back with something to do that.
So will that be agendized and will that come back to us?
We'll bring it back as an agenda item.
Okay. Okay, is that good? Okay, so with that, takes us to oral communications, and we do have one speaker here, Jim Riggenbach. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Jim Riggenbach, Vista resident. I wanted to add to Councilmember Franklin's request that the Exodus social worker be referred to as Vista social worker. In the interest of educating the public, I think it's important to point out that the social worker is not a city employee, and that can have ramifications on pay and benefits, which affects longevity of the person and ability to do the job. Like just that person's freedom to do what needs to be done, offer criticisms, because that person needs to get their contract renewed on a yearly basis. So paid with city funds, but not a city employee. I think that's an important distinction. And then in addition, Councilmember Franklin, your sarcastic hyperbole when discussing people's reality is gross. It was laughable last meeting when you announced that we can no longer buy lawnmowers. That's kind of comical. It's not true though. But tonight's lecture about the reality of people suffering and how they want to and can live wherever they want, that's nasty. One of those places is a culvert under the street in your district.
So that's our last speaker. So with that, we will go to our council remarks. We'll start at the other end today. So how about Councilmember Melendez?
I don't have anything more to add, but everybody have a good, safe night.
Councilmember Contreras.
I just want to thank everybody who came and witnessed, and even if you witnessed online, but this is a historic moment for our council moving forward with a shelter option, with the next discussion being an RFP. So that's really exciting. Depending on the weather, I always do say that there's a trash pickup on Wednesday. If you get there between 9 a.m. and 9:15, because we start walking around 9:15, but 9 a.m. at Luz Duran Park. But if it's raining, you're not going to see me picking up trash. It gets a little messy. I've tried that before and it was not very fun. So if it's not raining, come on down. We have all the supplies you need, and you can help us pick up some trash. Outside of that, I just hope everybody has a very blessed night, and I will see you next time.
Councilmember Franklin.
Nothing more from me.
Deputy Mayor.
Nice. All right. So first of all, thank you guys for showing up. Greatly appreciate it. I would like to not only mention this is a historic moment for the, homeless shelter that we spoke about, but this is also the first time a city councilman has sat on this dais without a tie. And I wanted to draw attention to my pink shirt because it is October, which is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And both my mother-in-law and my aunt were diagnosed early onset with breast cancer. They were able to beat it with early tracing and early treatment. So women, get your mammogram. Super important. Us men love you, and we want you to get checked and be okay. So there's the pink, no tie, breast cancer awareness. I serve on the Sandag Litter Abatement Committee, which Catherine Blakespear, Mayor Vincenitas chairs. And yesterday we had our meeting, and I provided the copies of the PowerPoints on not only the regional task force on homelessness report that was presented, but also the Sandag Litter Abatement strategies. And we have been bombarded with phone calls by our council with the different, like you say, homeless encampments along Caltrans right-of-way. And those are one of the different types of encampments. They're either on city property, state property, or private property. And this is state property. So they've come up with a really good strategy, in my opinion, to abate the litter. It's the 4 E's: engage, expand, enhance, and educate. And you guys will have access to this PowerPoint. We'll make sure awesome city clerk puts it up on our website with other ads to pack it for you. But a couple cool things on there is that they are giving grants out for just improvements at different off-ramps of the freeway. So every district, every one of our council members are able to direct staff on applying for grants. The grant application is up on the 1st of December. I'm sorry, the 1st of December 2021, and staff is actually already working on presenting grants. So if anybody from the community who's listening thinks, hey, there's some off ramps that could be beautified, send us in, let us know. Additionally, you guys have probably seen these adopt a highway things, and there's a lot of local organization that adopt stretches of highway. Caltrans, in order to encourage them cleaning, is going to start offering $250 per month to every organization that adopts a highway. So I encourage Councilman Contreras, who loves picking trash up, to possibly adopt a highway, and we can get funding for it annually. In this particular report, it also talks about how they address the encampments on the freeway, because we've been asked, how do they prioritize? When do they remove? When do they assist? And what exactly do they do? So this particular report talks about how they assess the risks of the encampment, how they prioritize if they're an emergency or not, and then also what type of services they provide. There is a real humanitarian aspect to this. I know up here you only hear us talk about cleaning up our city and litter abatement and all that, but these are real people, and there are boots on the ground, like our Exodus City of Vista social worker, that is really getting this information, and they're doing really good work. So I wanted to provide this to my council, but also the citizens of Vista, so that we do sit on these regional committees, and we do let them know that we need change in our city and we need action in our city. And you guys should have seen recently, actually just yesterday, Sandag was out over off of Emerald conducting another cleanup. Last week, they conducted a cleanup underneath the Vista Village off-ramp, and they're going to continue to keep an eye on it. They have new strike teams, 2-person strike teams, that go out to all the sites reported and figure out what the best course of action is to clean them up. So the San Diego Sandag Litter Abatement Committee is working, and there is more money in the state to address litter abatement than there ever has been. So thank you for listening to that long-winded report, Madam Mayor. And it's Taco Tuesday, and it's not 8 o'clock, and I'm going to go get tacos at Philly Birdo's off of Vista Way. 99-cent beef tacos. Take that, take that, take that.
Okay. The Moonlight Youth Theater's Wizard of Oz has its final performance this weekend, and I saw it last weekend. It's so good. It was a great show. So if you want to learn more, at moonlightstage.com. And Halloween is coming, you guys. So the city is hosting Trick or Treat event this Thursday, October 28th, at the Civic Center in our parking lot from 4 to 6. There'll be kids' treats, goodies, and our firefighters and sheriff deputies will be there. It's a free event, open to the public. Everybody come and let the kids trick or treat. So that's my comment. So City Manager Patrick Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor.
I got you right today. I didn't give any promotions today or anything.
No, thank you. Just one thing, piggybacking on your trick or treat event, the City of Vista has safety tips for kids and parents on our website. So at cityofvista.com, you can get tips on trick or treating and how to stay safe over the weekend. So thank you.
That was it?
That was it.
Oh, how about our city attorney, Daryl Piper?
That's it.
Oh my gosh, everybody's not had much to say. How about our city clerk, Kathy?
Nothing to add, thank you.
Claire down there, nothing? Oh, nobody has anything else. And it's only 7:38. Oh my gosh, we're done early tonight. Congratulations, everybody. We're adjourned.